YouTube, we're talking college sports in the Deep South where college football is king, and on the plains of Auburn, the battle cry is War Eagle. Once again, it's Kennard Vernon Stewart here for the podcast, talking a little bit about Auburn football. Go ahead and like this video, comment, and subscribe to the channel. And as always, it's great to be an Auburn Tiger, War Eagle. Now, the time has finally come. This coming weekend, after all the analysis, all of the dissecting of the different positions and coaching changes and things of that nature, finally, the game is all but here. Couple of days away. Today is Thursday. And you got Friday, then you got Saturday. Saturday night, 6:30 Central Standard Time, 7:30 Eastern, and 4:30 Pacific Time. The Oregon Ducks and Auburn Tigers will finally hit the big stage down in Arlington, Texas. A lot has been said as far as the superiority of the SEC over the Pac-12 and other conferences. And I don't want to get into where where it's defamation of character for the SEC or any other conference. We have to face the reality that every team in the Southeastern Conference is not necessarily a good football team, nor is the Pac-12 just loaded with all good football teams. One of the reasons, perception-wise, for the SEC's dominance, so to speak, is you look at the past few national championships over the last few years, obviously dominated by the University of Alabama. Then you got everybody else. The SEC tends to recruit well. If you look at the top rankings recruiting-wise, usually you'll find multiple SEC teams in that top tier. But at the same time, when we reference Auburn has to compete with some of the higher tier teams in the SEC. Georgia, LSU, Alabama, Texas A&M is coming up. Mississippi State, pretty good here and there. I think they could do very well in other conferences. But that's not to say that we're just talking about Auburn's competition. Not saying that the whole SEC is great, because it's not. But we look at even the defensive line position for the Auburn Tigers. I mean, well on their way to a possible elite season. Too deep, very fast, very physical, known for disruption. Even during the late stretch where things weren't going so well for Auburn, the defense still played at a pretty high level, at least along the defensive line. And we talk about, say, the offensive line for Oregon. I mean, this is not at all to discount the fact that Oregon has a good offensive line, has a big offensive line. But that is something that's unique to Oregon and unique to the Pac-12 when you talk about their size and you talk about their ability and how they're able to push people around. That's something that the Pac-12 is not really accustomed to having. Mario Cristobal, with his experience in the SEC. Now, here's the caveat to this. A lot of the Oregon and Pac-12, they disdain the SEC, but then at the same time, they will say, well, Oregon is on its way to being a good football team because Mario Cristobal is bringing some of what they do in the SEC over to the Pac-12. So either you admire the SEC or you don't. Because why is that a factor? If the SEC is not this conference that folks say they are, why is Mario Cristobal, being a former coach under Nick Saban at Alabama and all of the experience, why is that even a factor? But back to my message about the offensive line. That's something that's unique to the Pac-12. But then when you look at the Auburn Tigers and the teams that they have to face, not all of them. I'm talking about teams specifically. We're not talking about the conference. I'm talking about teams. LSU, Georgia, Alabama. I mean, that's enough right there. And then you could throw in Mississippi State and Texas A&M if you want to. All of these teams have large offensive lines as well. especially Georgia. Georgia in 2018 against Auburn, that game was well in hand for Auburn had an opportunity late. Jamil Dean with an interception. The score was only 20-10 at that point. Time of possession started to become a factor. After a while, those big bodies laying on you start to add up. Okay? So, I'm not saying that this is not an intriguing matchup, the offensive line for Oregon and the defensive line for Auburn. What I'm saying is this is not something that's unique for Auburn. And I know the message has been, well, we face teams like this and that. No, not all teams in the SEC have big lines like this. But the teams Auburn face, especially the high consequence games, they do. They're very big. They're very physical. So this will be nothing new for the Tigers. And that's not to downplay how great Oregon's offensive line is, because they're very experienced. Probably got 2 or 3 guys on that offensive line that will be playing on Sundays. Okay. Also, you got Justin Herbert, who is a dark horse for the Heisman candidacy. Is a very, very super accurate quarterback, especially when you can protect him. But you got to have some receivers that can catch the ball. Oregon, from what I understand, are battling some injuries, some key injuries at the wide receiver position that will make this a little bit more challenging for Oregon to be as good as they possibly can be if they had the receivers in place. That's not to say that it's going to totally slow down the offense, because you still have the services of C.J. Verdell, he's going to be a 1,000-yard rusher in the Pac-12. He's going to be all Pac-12, and he's going to be a great running back this year. He's going to have a really, really good game, though, against Auburn to help supplement what could be some issues with the passing game for Oregon, especially going up against Auburn, who I feel is a much improved secondary, much more athletic. I think you're going to get a little bit more stability and consistency out of Noah Igbenogany. So many options that you have, though, with Smoke Monday, with Jamian Sherwood, Christian Tutt, probably the most versatile player on this particular secondary. I think that's going to make this a huge thing for the Tigers. And on the other side, Oregon has a good secondary as well. Diamador Lenore, very talented guys. Javon Holland, very talented guys at that secondary that's going to really, really create some type of disruption and disturbance with a brand new quarterback for Auburn. Now, mind you, Bo Nix is not – I just don't believe he's your typical true freshman quarterback. I think he comes into the game with a lot of intangibles. I think he comes with a lot of leadership and preparation. You can never be fully ready for a moment like this, but if any true freshman in the country is ready for a moment like this, I think it would be Bo Nix. Okay, so we've talked about the defensive line and offensive line, for Auburn, but we haven't mentioned the defensive line for Oregon, who is going to be somewhat inexperienced. They do definitely have the services of Kayvon Thibodeau, the second-rated player in 24/7 Sports out of high school from last year, number 1 rated player by ESPN. I think he will be a very good football player and a very nice force in this particular game for the Oregon Ducks. But the question is, will it be enough? Will it be enough? Will Oregon have enough depth along the defensive line to handle, Gus Malzahn and his fast-paced offense and a very, very experienced offensive line for the Tigers? Cole Kubelik did mention, he was like, hey, I got to see it to believe it. And that's where I'm at with this. With the offensive line, I think they have improved. But at this point in the game, I really have to see if they're going to communicate well, if they're going to work as a unit, and really, really impose their will on teams by communicating and playing physical football. Okay, so as we go into, this particular ball game, you look at all the things involved, injured receivers for Oregon, which I know will be a factor in some form or fashion. My biggest key, though, is the devil you don't know. I think Auburn, with Gus Malzahn as the primary play caller, also going to get a little help from Cody Burns and Kenny Dillingham to see the totality of the possibilities offensive-wise. I think you're loaded with talent at the wide receiver. Pick a running back. You got about 5 of them that you can choose from in this particular game. Not to take away from Oregon, I think they're gonna give it a really, really good go. I think they have the talent, and I think they have the tools, and are starting to develop the depth. Because even Mario Cristobal talked about the number of scholarship players that he had this year compared to last year. So you can tell Oregon is really developing a monster over there. The only issue that I have is it takes monsters time to develop. And I just don't think that time can match the levels of experience with the Auburn Tigers. You're talking about guys that have been stacked up since 2015 on to now. And you have a lot of very, very variable experience and talent that has started to overlap. So how do I think this game will go from a score standpoint? As I visualize a game like this, I look at a quarterback like Bo Nix who can and probably will have some level of struggle at first. But I just don't think if the game won't come down to silly mistakes that he's made or freshman mistakes that he's made. The play of the offensive line is definitely going to be key. Defensive line, the defense, I think, is going to play very well in this game. I think Oregon is going to have some issues with running the football, and Justin Herbert is going to have to really, really show that this will be a nice Heisman moment for Justin Herbert, because it will rest somewhat on his shoulders and his ability to navigate his team through this Auburn defense. I think Oregon has a great football team. I think they're up and coming, definitely with the last recruiting class, and have several guys in this particular class that could be immediate contributors. But as I predict this particular football game, I have Auburn 35-28. I think this will be a little bit higher scoring game than most people think, especially with Oregon. Oregon is going to have to attempt to try to keep up with the Tigers. So we're looking at a 35-28 ball game. Hope you guys enjoy it. Down in Arlington, Texas, the Advocare Classic is finally here. Go ahead and like this video, comment, and subscribe to the channel. And as always, it's great to be an Auburn Tiger, War Eagle.